It's been on the city council in Mountain View, I think a total of 16 years, an 8-year period, a 4-year break, and then two-year break, and then 2 more terms. So I worked with this guy a very long time, and I found him to be one of the more cutting-edge council members that I worked with over the years, and that's a joke between the two of us. I think Mountain View is a really good textbook example. It's an extreme example, I think, of a community that is kind of squeezed in a number of ways, different than Los Altos, but a community that has to navigate, an elected officials who have to navigate their way between the citizenry, between the very high-tech, powerful companies that are moving into Mountain View, a community where housing prices and the supply of housing cannot possibly keep pace with the growth in jobs. Yet, through all of this, the city has worked, I think, fairly successfully with developers, and through a variety of techniques and persuasions and arm twisting, has been able to work with the developers to get them to provide important community benefits. And so today, Mike will kind of share some of his experience in furthering the government, the city objectives when dealing with all of these powerful development folk. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike. You're currently on the board of CSA, which is great, and now I'm the president of the board, so actually he's working for me now.
Why we elected you?
So it's been kind of neat to see it the other way around. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, good morning, everybody, and it's great to be here, and I feel like actually, I live in that part of Mountain View that was annexed from pre-Los Altos, I think actually, which caused Los Altos to ultimately incorporate in 1952. So I feel like I'm a Los Alton, and I know, at least half of you anyway. So I'm going to start with a little bit of, so Kathy, cutting edge. So I had just gotten elected to the city council way back in 1999 and was in meeting with Kathy and Joan Jenkins, and we were talking about transportation. And she was, well, what do you think? What do you want to do? Dangerous questions from a department head to a newly elected council member. And one of the things I had been thinking about was, I called it like a vehicle impact fee. Because, we have people in Mountain View, and I'm sure there are those in Los Altos that have 4, 5, or 6 vehicles, and at least in Mountain View, we don't have big garages and big driveways, so everybody parks them in the street. And I said, what we really ought to do is everybody gets a car. You can have 1 car. But you get your second car, and then there's a $75 annual impact fee. And your 3rd car is $150, and your 4th car is $500. Make up a number. But the point is, you get fined for having a lot of excess vehicles, and we'll use all of that money to fund transportation systems in the community. Cutting edge idea, Councilmember Kasperzak. You run with that in your next election. Anyways, it's still an idea, but everybody knows I think personally that transportation, lack of transportation, traffic congestion is probably the single greatest impediment to growth. It's what really upsets people. They can't get from here to there because of all the cars. We're not going to be building, well, except maybe at Cooper Park, apartments in the middle of residential neighborhoods, and we won't be doing it, the school district would be. But, that doesn't really bother people. It's the traffic and congestion and getting around town, the mobility issues. But that's not what we're here to talk about. So, Kathy had wanted me to talk a little bit about public-private partnerships and what Mountain View has done with housing specifically. Public-private partnerships is a really big deal in the government sector, in the private-public sector, and it goes way beyond issues around affordable housing. And in fact, Mountain View has a couple of other examples of sort of public-private partnerships that it's working on. As probably most of you know, the main building complex of the Googleplex is on city property out in the North Bay Shore. That was the old farmer's field that was developed, oh gosh, when I was on the, I think it was being developed when I was back on the Parks Commission, back in 94. But, you know, so the city leased that to Google, or leased it to SGI, who developed it, and then when SGI sort of went out of business, they turned it over to Google. We're working on a public-private partnership right downtown now with the Robert Greene Company to build a hotel. But in addition to the hotel, he's going to add about 150 additional parking spaces in an underground garage that'll serve both the hotel and the community. But it's city property. It's the city's parking lot. Sort of an idea that was put forth by a different hotel developer sort of caught the imagination of the council and the city. And so that is moving forward at a glacial pace, but moving forward nonetheless, and hopefully it will come to fruition before the market turns, and again, we lose another hotel in Mountain View. But the Mountain View has been particularly successful in the affordable housing realm because of they're semi-private. They're public nonprofit partnerships because all of our affordable housing developers are nonprofit corporations. Well, except for Rome. I guess Rome is not. But our first foray that I remember getting into was what is now the San Antonio Place Efficiency Studio project at San Antonio Circle, which is also where the Community School of Music and Arts is. And that really started it was an interesting project because if you can remember back that far, that used to be a big cloverleaf sort of traffic loop. As you pulled off of San Antonio Road, you circled around, you ended up over by Bruce Bauer Lumber, and it was just one big traffic loop. And it was just a big bunch of public space. And at the same time, it really started out that the Community School of Music and Arts had been looking to build a new facility because Huff was going to be reopened as a school, looking all over the place. And Kat, it might have been your shop because that sort of came up. So, we have this 2 acres of land with a big road that circles it, but you can't get into it. If we reconfigured this piece of this road, we could get 2 parcels. And again, that great idea from staff. And I think there were some people in communities who think that staff are mindless bureaucrats, which is not the case. Really good creative staff who is empowered by the council can really come up with great ideas. And so reconfiguring, coming up with 2 parcels, made it possible for the Community School of Music and Arts to develop their center there. And they've, I think, just gotten approval to do an addition over there. And then was actually one of our first real affordable housing projects with Charities Housing, and when they did the San Antonio Place project. And I can remember because that was a really big deal because the question was whether we should build that downtown on one of the city parcels downtown or build it over there. And I still remember this meeting. I was a proponent of a downtown affordable, of having the project downtown. It is the project where Mountain View really left the term SRO, which does not stand for standing room only, but stands for single room occupancy. But SROs in Mountain View were sort of the downtown flop houses, and so we sort of had this internal joke that it's a $5 fine if we use the term SRO. We coined the term efficiency studio apartments, and that became the San Antonio Place. But it was a big deal about where to have that. We also had some parcels downtown that belonged to the city, and but the majority of the council wanted to put it way over there. And it turned out to be, a great place. The San Antonio Caltrain stop was not there at the time, but it has since moved there, so that's been good. And as you all know, that area of Mountain View is becoming a very intense area. Prometheus now has the I think maybe the largest apartment complex in the city going up. We don't know what the Los Altos School District is going to be doing at the old Safeway site. We've heard what they want to do, but whether that happens or not, who knows yet. But it's, there's a lot going on there. But that was really the first time where the city and the city council really started partnering with a nonprofit housing developer to build property or build an affordable housing, with the city. And the agreements that the city of Mountain View has made, over the years, and I, to this day, don't fully understand it. But what the city has done through its housing, below market rate housing programs, has developed a fund of affordable housing, money, that we use. And what we've done is the city still owns the land, does a long-term lease to the nonprofit, but through some mechanism uses the affordable housing monies then to sort of pay the lease to the city. So the city gets that money back through lease payments, but it's really the city's money getting paid back to the city, but it goes from a restricted housing fund back into general fund revenues that the city then uses. And the nonprofit then does not have really that obligation to pay the funds. And so it is a way for the city to get some revenue. I actually have thought, and we've talked about this with a couple of members of the council, and this is off the public-private partnership thing, is, we don't have to pay ourselves back with that money. The city doesn't have to. A lot of people say, well, it's a gift of government funds and blah, blah, blah. Well, that's not a real issue. I actually think if the city council in Mountain View or other cities was super aggressive around affordable housing funds to say, well, we will let you use this land for $1 a year, and all this affordable housing money that we've accumulated because of all these other housing projects, we're going to use that to finance even more projects. So we could get, twice the bang for our buck. But I don't think the council isn't there yet, but I think they are moving. They may be moving in that direction. So San Antonio Place was the first project that we really did. And is anybody that knows downtown Mountain View, we've had several major parcels in the downtown area. And originally, we looked at those as, do we want to do affordable housing downtown or market rate housing or market rate and ground floor commercial? And maybe 10 years ago, well, certainly when we did San Antonio Place, there was more desire possibly to have market rate housing downtown. And I remember when I had just first gotten elected to the League of California Cities, second vice president, we had a meeting with newly elected Jerry Brown. And I remember talking with Governor Brown, and this is when he was letting us know that we were going to be getting rid of redevelopment agencies and all of this. But he was talking about downtown Oakland, and we were talking about affordable housing and how RDAs really made, with housing set-aside funds, the building of affordable housing very, not economical, but possible. And Jerry's comment was, I've never really liked affordable housing. When I was mayor of Oakland, I didn't want affordable housing in downtown Oakland. I didn't want poor people living in downtown Oakland. I wanted rich people living in downtown Oakland to support all the businesses. Okay, that's a policy position. Jerry has not been a total friend of affordable housing and the housing crisis in general, but he did come around last year. But in any case, Mountain View originally was probably more market rate housing downtown. And we have several major parking lots. There's the one behind 444 Castro, or some people know it as Dog City, and The city actually acquired many pieces of that and aggregated that parcel, what is now a single parcel, but it was about 4 or 5 different parcels. We actually, I'm sorry?
PG&E.
Yeah, I mean, PG&E, we bought actually a residence that's had like a 5 foot intrusion into this big, nice rectangular lot. We separated that little split off and then resold the house to somebody else. It got all caught up in our redevelopment agency wind down because it was all purchased with redevelopment funds. We had an the old fire station across the street from Tide House, which is a city public parcel. And there was the Bryant Street parking lot behind the Tide House. And that was another one of the city's projects with a housing developer to come up with another affordable housing project. That was a very interesting project, and I was not on the council when that first happened, but it was actually doing a little bit of consulting work with Rome Development Company. They are a for-profit housing developer that has gotten into the nonprofit housing world, and they wanted to get into doing some nonprofit housing or some affordable housing development. But at the time, cities like Mountain View were only, being approached by Eden Housing, Ridge Housing, Palo Alto Housing Corporation, Mid-Peninsula Housing, all of the traditional nonprofit housing developers. But Rome got in and was able to work out a plan, and they developed and proposed and ultimately succeeded in building what is a family affordable housing project. I think it has up to 3-bedroom units. There was a lot of concern with the neighborhood. Again, this was a city parking lot, so we did all of the usual things. It's leased to them. The city of Mountain View does not like to sell its own land. That is one of the things that I took away from Mountain View. It seems to have worked very well. I don't know what will happen when all of these projects get to their 55 or 60-year lifespan. But with that project, the neighbors living in a condominium complex right next door were all up in arms. Oh, those people are moving next to, oh my God, there goes the value of our property. The city spent a lot of time, the council spent a lot of time on the design of that project. I can remember Rome basically they had the floor plan, but they brought 3 different sort of stylistic concepts. I mean, there was sort of like a Spanish style, sort of a modernistic sort of style like you're seeing along El Camino these days, or a sort of Santa Barbara sort of style. And the council sort of took what's there, is sort of more of the middle of the road. They didn't want to go too far, but it has turned out to be a wildly successful project. Google, it was interesting. It was done with tax credits. And I think we did the 9% tax credits on that, but we had to go through 2 or 3 cycles to get the state tax credits on that. It was interesting because when it opened, Google got all the credit for contributing $9 million to this project. And it was like, Google contributed about $9,000 worth of computers. They bought $9 million of tax credits, and the media, of course, totally messed that up because, they're not giving $9 million; they're buying $9 million in tax credits that they can use to write off against their profits. So, I mean, that's what the tax credit system is for. But it was all, Google was like the great savior, and it's like, no, Google's saving, just doing, shareholder return stuff here. So, but that has been a great project, and ironically, it is a better looking and better maintained project than the condominiums that were next door and where everybody was really concerned about what this affordable housing project was going to do to their property values. The other thing, and I think everybody that sort of spends any time in this space knows, is, you know, we talk about affordable housing and what that means and the community's perceptions of affordable housing. And, you know, to this day, I would say in Mountain View, it really isn't. I mean, affordable housing projects are not controversial in Mountain View anymore. I think part of that is just the cost of housing is so bad. But people also realize now that, I mean, I used to say, well, you know, these are affordable housing projects. These are for people that, you know, like newspaper reporters, you know, who are not making $100,000 a year, by the way, or grocery clerks, or real life people with real life jobs that are not making more than $50,000 a year in their job. And that's a lot of people. That's who gets to live here. That's who this is being built for. So it's real housing for real people. It is not, you know, people's old perceptions of, you know, the old SROs downtown, which, you know, literally were like just people, well, shelters. I mean, that's what people are really worried about, that these are going to be homeless shelters. And even that shouldn't be an issue. But that's not what we're building. Mountain View has really kept going with all of this as well. We still have at least two other downtown parking lot parcels, which are, and in fact, I think the parcel behind the skyscraper is the next project moving forward. I think the council is probably going to be looking at that. You probably know better than I do, Sue, very shortly. But and that again will be probably a affordable housing project. I don't know if it's going to, you know, be heavily senior or not. I think there has been some talk about that, but also with a ground floor retail component. The city in Mountain View, and I'm not spending a lot of time on the public-private nature of these, but these are all public-private projects. The council has actually gotten a little concerned about what, you know, people are now hearing. And finally, when the governor signed the bill overturning the Palmer case, Mountain View has reinstated its inclusionary zoning requirements for apartment complexes, which have been sort of, you know, out of that loop for the last 10 years. But now, you know, anytime a new apartment complex goes up, 15% of the units have to be affordable. I think it's usually at the 60 to 80% level. It's not as deep a discount, but there's some talk about, well, if you go higher to 20 or 25, you can charge almost market rate, but it might, you know, it's for the people at 100 to 120 rate. And so it's less of a subsidy for the developer, so you can get more units and that sort of thing. And there is a strong belief that having inclusionary housing where you have people of lower incomes living with people of market rate incomes is a better situation than just having, you know, projects. And unfortunately, there is a big project going on. It's not a public-private partnership, but it's an organization that owned the property. They're going to take down all of the apartments. It's like maybe 200 units. They want to build about 400 units there. So they want to double the size of this project. And they're going to have one building that will be an affordable building. And unfortunately, they have to do it that way because they can only finance the structure of that building with the tax credits. You can only use those for people at the very low income. And so it will be, unfortunately, one of those situations where people in the complex have all the access to all of the amenities, but the people in this building, which is part of the complex, won't have access because it will be, it will be the poor people building, which is really unfortunate. But those are some of the issues that we deal with and governments deal with sort of the way we have decided how we finance affordable housing through, the federal tax credits. And there has been some talk in Washington about the missing middle and trying to move up those affordability ranges, but not quite the administration to go too far with those. Again, getting back to Mountain View, so there is the other project downtown. A lot of our housing developers, well, Rome specifically, has been pretty aggressive at finding market rate properties as well, and they're building a 150-unit affordable project on Evelyn Avenue down by Bernardo. The city has also, through its affordable housing program, we assess fees on all of the housing, plus we assess fees on all the office development that's being built. I think the housing impact fee on office development is $25 a square foot. Does that sound right? You might, I think, it's 25. That's okay. So, so every new square foot of space that Google builds in Mountain View, they have to pay $25 a square foot into our housing fund. And our housing fund is in the, I don't know, $15 to $25 million range. And the city just did another notice of funding availability for a couple of projects. But what that process enables, and it's not quite the same public-private partnership because the developers are now buying market rate properties rather than using city properties. But we've had One El Camino, which has been open now for about 2 years. It's a special needs facility for people with disabilities. I think it's got about 30 units in there, but it's independent living for people with disabilities. There's another project that's being built right now. You can see that they've got some of the steel posts up, but that's going to be an affordable housing project for veterans. Half the units will be for veterans. And again, that was done through the city's affordable housing project. I think each of those has got between $5 and $10 million of affordability. There was actually a huge impact from the tax cuts. I think it was the tax bill, because the corporations like Google, who were buying these 9% tax credits, all of a sudden they're getting this windfall from the federal government, and all of a sudden they don't need the 9% tax credits. And so this one project had all been financed. The city had included about $1 million in contingency just in case, and the financing fell through after the tax bill went through. And they were able to put it back together, but it took another $1 million of public resources to make the financing work out. So it's moving forward. But again, it's not using the city land, but it's the city through its affordable housing revenues. And I think most of that revenue is coming from the office development. And it's one of those things from a policy direction. And even Mountain View is like, well, Mike's never seen a development he didn't like. Mostly true. But I was totally out there with the policies around, $25 a square foot. We were at 15, we went up to 25, but it's just like, it's sort of a double-edged sword. That's money we need for housing. More jobs mean more need for housing. And if, by the way, it has a chilling impact on the amount of office development going on, not an altogether negative thing. Not that I'm trying to, I don't want to stop it, but if you guys can keep spending this and still afford to build a building, have at it, because we do need the housing. And the community is getting, and of course that's true in Los Altos too, we haven't seen this level of building around here in years. We went during the .com era, we went through a lot of entitlement activity in Mountain View. The Mayfield Mall, that was entitled twice with 800 housing units, then re-entitled to 400 housing units, then never mind, we're going to put Google driverless cars there and rebuild the office building. But, the community of Mountain View, the community of Los Altos, it's like, when is that recession coming? Let's slow this down a little bit. Let's take a breather. And I actually, politically, I'm not running for city council again, and so I'm all done with that. But, I think that the communities, our communities are, stressed by the amount of growth that's going on. It's a lot of change all at once. And again, a lot of it goes to the mobility issues. And again, that's where having housing, along transportation corridors, Mountain View's built a lot downtown around the transit center. People can walk, and making walkable communities, where people don't have to get in their cars and that sort of thing. So I'll stop blabbering there and blabber in response to questions if you have any. So, yeah.
Mike, I picked up on an interesting comment, and that was when Mountain View started their concept of affordable housing or workforce housing, and you put it not in your core downtown. What were the discussions around placing it not in the core? Was it more of the Jerry Brown, we want people downtown that are going to spend money issue, or was there something else?
I'm thinking back, and Kathy may have some recollection of that. I think it was, this was one of the first sort of projects that was really coming from the ground up. Up until that point, what Mountain View had done with the small amount of money that we had was actually like Marcy Freeland Place, which had been an affordable project built with, through the federal government. It was going market, and so we used the money with Mid-Peninsula Housing to maintain its affordability. Wasn't Marcy Freeland Place?
No, that was my project. That was one that Jim Lynch, the city, found that project, and that was when the council decided that they wanted to do something in that general area.
Right.
Because there was so many bad, it was a project owned by a general manager from Los Altos who was milking it to death.
So that one was, but there had been some other ones where we had preserved affordability. We weren't building anything. What we were doing was preserving sort of affordable housing that was already there, but it needed to be refinanced or acquired by somebody or stuff like that. So San Antonio Place was like the first new project.
Yeah, my recollection of that is, I think that was happening, the city was feeling pressure to do an affordable project. But also, I think around that time, they were also rethinking their precise plans and so forth for the downtown. So the downtown kind of vision of what it was going to be relative to housing wasn't quite solidified. So the decision was made because people were anxious to move, to reconfigure the traffic circle at San Antonio, create some developable land, and do that project there.
I think there were some issues also about the differences in value of the downtown land versus the land over at San Antonio Shopping Center. So sort of the value of the subsidy would be less. And it was a different city council. That was Mario and Ralph Faravelli, and it was, sort of, we also had Mary Lou and Rosemary and Nancy, I think may have still been on. But so the council was changing. It was not nearly as affordable housing driven as the current city council is. It was sort of the first foray into building a new project. And unfortunately, I still remember I was the first council member to get out and speak. I think it should be downtown, it's walkable, and blah, blah, blah. All of these things, why the downtown is the perfect place for it. But having heard everybody's comments, it was very clear that it was going to be 6-1.
So my question is about the concern about how you benefit the community by activating the downtown versus activating a workforce affordable housing project, which may not benefit the core downtown as much as other highest and best uses. How did you decide on the highest and best use for the public land?
Well, that's still the ongoing issue. And I think the issue is that anybody living in the downtown activates. I mean, it's like, who's living there? Real people are living there. Everybody eats, everybody shops. You don't have to be having a $1.5 million condominium downtown, although $1.5 million condominiums downtown are doing quite well as well. But, part of Mountain View's view around affordable housing is that this is also, housing and transportation are intimately involved with each other. If you can't live here, you are going to have to drive here, and we hate more cars. And so having people living where they're living in a walkable, transit-oriented environment is highly desirable, which is why so many of the city's parcels downtown are going into housing as opposed to more office. I mean, Mountain View is still principally a one-street downtown. Don't let anybody know. I actually love the layout of Los Altos more than I love the layout of downtown, just because, you can walk around and not be, oh, now I've got to walk a mile to the other end of town. But it is about just having people downtown, and Mountain View is also, and this is very clear in many of the things, the city and the residents really value the diversity of the community, which is one of the reasons why the voters enacted rent control 2 years ago.
I'm trying to get a concept of the highest and best use and get educated myself and understanding, are there any studies that say office buildings provide this for downtown, workforce housing provides this, a mix of both provides this? How does the community get educated on what's best for the community?
I would say that getting that granular into the data was not a priority of the council at any point. That these were, from the city's perspective, public parcels, and while the city could build an office building, lease it out, and have a higher return on investment for the community generally, it's really attenuated. And it would be better for the community to provide housing. And so, I think, and it really is just a fairly simple emotional value judgment, I think, on the part of the council. Is I think people say, oh yeah, office building, it's going to make the taxpayers more money. But is that the highest and best use, not from a financial perspective, but from a humanistic perspective? And I think the current council is sort of more along I'm calling it a humanistic approach as opposed to a financial bottom line. The financial bottom line has not been as important to the council.
Mike, you got some questions over there.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Just following up on that, here in Los Altos, we had a project called the First Street Green, which included a public-private partnership. So we were going to take one of our public parking lots and underground it 2 or 3 levels and build a community park on top.
Right.
And there was an outcry from a certain segment of the population, like, don't touch our public land. Whatever you do, don't touch it. We like our old crappy parking lots. So my question is, we have public land here, but how do you get past that mentality of it's our public land? If we were to put an affordable housing complex, it'd be even worse, because people would say, oh, we can't walk through the door because we don't live there, and it's our land, so don't touch our land. Whereas even with a beautiful community park that everyone could share, they still couldn't wrap their heads around it. So did you encounter a huge public outcry? Or?
The San Antonio place had more controversy around it, not whether we should do it or not, but where it should go. And that was the first one, and it ended up over there. But it ended up over there pretty unanimously. I mean, it was that's.
You know, a lot of people coming to the council meetings.
And there were people over by San Antonio Place now that over at the crossings actually, that were not happy. There was a do not build it here, we don't want those people here.
It wasn't because it was public land, like, you have no right to touch our public land.
No, it wasn't that. I mean, I've seen some really great projects where they undergrounded the Union Square parking lot in San Francisco. So, I think it's a community value sort of thing, and once Mountain View has gone to, okay, now, really, an affordable housing project sails through Mountain View. I mean, everybody gets up and say, finally, faster, bigger, better. But that's been a change in the community. But, one of the things is, as I said, Mountain View doesn't sell its land. It's still the public's land. It's the public's parking lot and park, and that sort of thing. So, Kim, and then you, and Robin, and then Lori. Sue and I talk so much,
I'm very curious about this balance that you found between using public land for housing and office. And from what I'm sensing is that the housing isn't so much, it's $1 a year or whatever, but the office kind of pays for that. When you do, I assume it's a long-term lease to Google or whoever to build office, in addition to the 15 or 25 that they're putting per square foot, what financial benefit is there to the city? How does that kind of work? And I think that's it.
Right. So, and first, like where the Googleplex is, until, 3 months ago, you couldn't build housing out in the North Bay Shore. So, there wasn't an issue of housing or office that, that was the industrial park. And with the farmer's field, which had been the city's lease to Google, and I think the city still owns that, but it's long-term leases where they're building the new dome project. I mean, they prepaid a 30-year lease on that. They said, okay, we want it, here's $30 million, and then we have to figure out, well, we're not going to spend it all at once. But the other thing that we've also done in our precise plans, it's also true with what's happening up at San Antonio Shopping Center, is we've created sort of tiers of development. And so you can build sort of a 1.0 FAR project without having to do any hoo-ha. But if you want to build more, in addition to all the other fees, we start requiring, requiring more. So if you're going to build more housing, you now have to build 20% affordable housing instead of just the 15%. And we also now are requiring community benefits, and it's sort of gotten down to a fee, a per square foot additional fee. But the concept behind the community benefit is the private property is private property, and you have a right to build it according to what the rules of the community are. We will allow more intensity, but at some point, what you're doing is going to have negative impacts on the community. So you now have to do some stuff to really serve the community at a higher level than just mitigating. So yes, you have to do it to mitigate the impacts, but you have to do something because you're making a profit off this community, and you have to compensate the community for that extra level of development. And the city of Vancouver, British Columbia, has an interesting concept where the land intensity, use intensity, is a community asset. So if you are a landowner and you want to come in and change the zoning on your farmland in the center of the city from farmland to high-intensity office, you have the right to come in and the council will, rezone that property. But you are not you don't own that intensity. The community owns that intensity. And so the value of your land may go from $1 an acre to $10 billion an acre. But you as the developer do not own all of that enhanced value. You will get a return on investment for what you spend to rezone it, but the community maintains, so that when you sell it, you have to pay the community. It's something like 40% of the value of that enhanced value belongs to the community. Because, it's the community who's giving up the sort of tranquility, if you will, for the higher development. So that means a different way of really, we're not doing that much around here, but the community benefit concept is sort of a realization of, the developer just doesn't get the windfall from the enhanced intensity of land use.
So I think Los Altos is warming up a bit to affordable housing. The council just approved some changes to the rules for ADUs on Tuesday. I think we would really warm up the idea of building the housing in Mountain View. But,
Say that again. Well, I hear you.
just throwing that out there. But really the answer, I don't know if we can build our way out of this quickly enough, right? Unless we start creating some skyscrapers. So really the other side of it is the mobility question. Do you see any hope there?
I do. One of the cutting edge things that the city council finally did, just as I was leaving the council, is we did this automated guide brake technology study. And, I've been pushing, pod cars and things for the last several years, getting transportation off the road. We don't have any more street capacity. And but cities own the right of way, to the stratosphere or whatever it is. So, or at least, 30 or 40 feet up. So why can't we start coming up with some transportation systems that are other than four-wheel, rubber-wheeled cars on the road where there's no more space? And so I think looking at the study, and I'm not particularly pleased with how the study came out because it was performed by a bunch of people that understand cars. Yeah. And so, we're asking them to envision George Jetson, but these are still car people. And I think the study still came out very car, sort of vehicle-centric. Autonomous vehicles on tracks and on the roads. And it's like, come on, you guys. So, but what was really significant is that the council was saying, yeah, mobility is important and it's got to be mobility off the street. And where you really see this is out of the Googleplex is, there is a ton of bike riding and walking. And vehicles are totally impacted. You can't turn right, on the shoreline from Charleston because everybody's walking. So you have to now separate the pedestrians and the bicyclists from the vehicle flow, or the vehicle flow, whatever it is not going to move. And so sort of, Mountain View does have a company that's been developing a personal rapid transit system. There are several other, none of them is ready for prime time yet, but a lot of them are getting closer. And I think, what Mountain View has done is said, we are really interested in this, and now the staff knows that it's not just the former mayor who's got this pipe dream. The entire council spent $300,000 on a study. Hopefully this study itself just sits on the shelf, but the staff knows this is a real viable option and the council is very interested in it. So I actually do think there's some potential for that. Rob?
Mike, one's a financial question. So when I look at, on an annual basis, Mountain View's city budget, the percentage of revenue that comes from leasing those public lands is just enviable. All right, it's enviable.
Right.
And so my question is, did you, and again, recognize you're, Mountain View several decades ahead of us in terms of, to Kim's point, office and now, shifting to housing. But did you stumble into that shape of your, I'm going to say, income statement? Or was there somebody on city staff that said, you know, if we own the land and we develop these long-term leases, this will be 10, 12, 18% of our annual budget, and here's how we behave bigger than, you know, and less reliance on, you know, real estate taxes from our residents. How did you think about that?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of that certainly happened before I got there. I mean, you know, Bruce Lidstrom, who had been our city manager, and then Kevin, I had just had lunch with Kevin. Kevin was a tightwad. I mean, so he was just a tightwad. And, you know, he personally didn't think the community should sell his property. And, you know, we all know what school districts did, so they sold off their parcels, you know. Fortunately, you know, Mountain View, Wisman didn't sell a couple of their current ones, but they did sell a couple. But I think this was something that Bruce, who was really a planning visionary, more so than Kevin, but I think Kevin was very fiscally restrained in terms of spending, not selling the land, and really looking at that as you know, longer-term revenue.
The brilliance was not selling the land, but also not allowing the balance sheet to be lazy. So in other words, how do we use it and still own the land? That was the brilliance of Kevin.
Yeah, and Kevin as a city manager was, if it works, it's the council's fault, and if it doesn't, it's my fault. Well, you know, that was not the council's doing. That was certainly management's doing. But at the same time, you know, the council, you know, has really learned from that, and it has become, you know, very much a part of sort of the political philosophy of Mountain View governance, in any case.
Yeah, just to add to that point, I mean, it wasn't just the setting of the.
We also had the land.
Well, we did, but the city was also open to doing all kinds of contortions to get the kind of land use that they wanted. For an example, when Google came years ago to get land in the North Bay Shore, we physically relocated a landfill, moved it to create a developable piece of property for Google. So it wasn't just that these guys would come in and say, oh yeah, we want this piece of property. The city would work with them to create the parcel, the environment that was conducive to their development.
Right, I mean, and you know, that was sort of like the San Antonio place, totally reconfiguring, you know, that. And, you know, I mean, a lot of that is still happening, you know, as the city is re-envisioning the North Bay Shore. The city just spent a boatload of money to buy 2 parcels from Google to realign Plymouth Street into an S-curve, and then, again, they'll sell off those parcels, you know, once that's done. But you know, the city fortunately has the resources to be able to do some of these things. I know there were a couple of, Sue?
Well, I just wanted to comment back to what Bart was asking and what you were saying. I think Mountain View has made the decision as a policy, as you said, that we do want to support affordable housing, so it's not always a financial decision. And I think what people in Los Altos have to realize is Mountain View does have a lot of property that they can long-term lease. Unless we have something innovative like Kathy come up with something like what you did for San Antonio Place, we basically have our downtown parking lots. And we also don't have any money because we have 3 city council members here, but it's been over a year since they looked at the Nexus study to try and decide whether we have impact fees. We didn't have a redevelopment agency. There's literally no money to add. So the only possible way that the city could help to do anything in affordable housing, if they put a value on it, is to lease a downtown parking lot for $1 a year and establish a public-private partnership. There's just no other way. So it comes down to a policy decision.
And, you know, I mean, I don't know, because I know one of the things that Kathy had sent me, I mean, you know, the Civic Center complex here has, you know, a a lot of land, it's a lot of openness, but again, it is one of those things as a community is, do we want to maintain these agrarian sort of historical values, or, do we want to say, well, we need to do some of that stuff and, we can reconfigure, parts of this. But again, parking lots, I mean, there's a lot of people that talk about, if we underground the high-speed rail coming up the peninsula, it creates real space, that you could, that then has value. I mean, they sort of did that up in San Francisco when they finally took down the Skyway, or the big dig in Boston, and all of a sudden, you've got all of that open space. Now, it's all parks because you can't really build buildings right over the big dig, but we know, I mean, there are subways and things running under buildings all over the world. It's not impossible to underground stuff and put stuff on top of it and really create value out of nothing. So,
Mike, I think we're time.
Yeah.
A few more questions, I think.
I can stay if people want to talk.
Yeah,
afterwards,
so
yeah.
if you need to leave, but we'll let Mike field some more questions.
Yeah.
It's simple. I still don't feel like I understand what the technical definition of a PPP is. And I hear that there's some sort of collaboration going on, but is there some technical definition?
I'm actually going to defer to Kathy because she probably negotiated more of those, but it really is, it's a public-private partnership where the public sector and the private sector are, working collaboratively together to make something happen.
But is there a contract involved?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And that includes like corporations, so if you can expand on that question while you're answering it, what else besides buying tax credits is the potential for private? Again, I'm not an expert on tax credit, so I can only speak from aside from that. Yeah, I mean, basically, it's a negotiated process, and it really requires the city on both a staff level and a council level to have a lot of conversations with the developers to find that sweet spot that means whatever the city's objective may be and what the developer objective may be. And then, once you kind of get a sense of, for lack of a better term, we would call it the business terms, the basic business terms, then you bring in specialized lawyers and negotiators to help flesh that out into a long-term agreement. I mean, if you're talking about a 50-year lease, that's a pretty complicated conversation regarding maintenance, regarding cost of living adjustments, some of your infrastructure in the building or the parking lot is not going to last for 50 years, what triggers it, who pays, but the real part of it, as in most negotiations in life, is really getting people at the table, talking to one another, figuring out what the various perspectives and goals and objectives are, and then developing your fundamental business points. At least at that point, you take it back from a staff perspective, you take it to the council to say, can we work within these specific deal points and develop around those? The council will say yes or no, and then you proceed forward from there.
And the hotel, it's funny, I don't think of our affordable housing projects on city land really as public-private partnerships.
No, the hotel is more...
The hotel, downtown hotel, is a much more classic example of a private developer that's trying to come in and do something, but at the same time, meeting the needs of the city by adding additional parking. It's going to be adding a lot of tax revenue at some point through a transient occupancy tax that it will generate and that sort of thing. But really, the real key to the public-private partnership is the willingness of the public body to say, we can be better than we can be bigger than what we are. We're not just this little microcosm, the community of Los Altos. We can do some bigger things, if we just indicate our willingness to the private sector, because the private sector is very creative. Typically more creative than government, but that doesn't mean there aren't creative people in government. But government needs to know from the policy leaders, we're willing to take a leap of faith here. And that's where it really comes down to.
It's a risky endeavor when you're trying something new. Is it gonna work? Is it not gonna work? Will the city be well served 10 years, 15 years from now? I mean, those are kind of a leap of faith, and you have to make sure that you've got the right experts at the table protecting the public's interest. And
they're all expensive experts.
they're expensive, but you also need a council that's willing to let the sort of administrative experts within the city negotiate on the city's behalf in a positive kind of way. So it's complex, it takes a really long time.
And of course, it's easy to say it takes a council that can do that. It takes a public that's willing to elect a council that will let them do that, because, I mean.
So Mike, did you have to go to the community and ask for a referendum on what their thoughts were in regards to this? Was the council able to just use highest and best use as they perceived it to get an outcome? Where did the community, how did that work?
The old-fashioned way.
Okay.
I ran on affordable housing, and I got elected.
Okay.
Even in a community, and the better example is when I came back to the city council after my first 8 years. I took 2 years off. I was the guy that had never voted down a project. I was all over the Mayfield Mall housing development, and there were a lot of people that said, Mike is just a development hub. I got reelected. And I got reelected on more housing and affordable housing. And you know what? I could say at a council meeting is I hear you, and I hear that you vote and that you're not going to vote for me again. Guess what? I was the second highest vote getter in this last election. I feel that I have a mandate to push for affordable housing. The community had said that to me and to the other colleagues that got elected. So I mean, you don't really have to go out there. I mean, if people who run on a platform and get elected, they've kind of got that mandate.
So the answer is the council made the decision.
Voters.
Well, the vote of the council and the council then put the platform.
We have not had a referendum to overturn a project, and we thought we might have one over San Antonio Phase 2, that worked out. But we haven't.
I mean, one of the things that Mountain View does that's just so darn impressive is the city council members go out and meet like every 2 years in the community. I've seen planning commission go out and hold meetings, right, in terms of, this is communication. There's just a ton of ongoing communication that is not necessarily related to those projects. And so they.
I'm glad you think that's impressive.
I know it's hard work, but it gets the residents, it gets no surprises. Engaged, right, there's no surprises.
Yeah, that's right, and Rob's referring to what we call as our council neighborhoods committee. And it's a committee of the council, and they, every sort of summer, they go out and visit 4 of the established sort of neighborhood areas. And it's really just the council committee sitting there listening to staff respond to all the questions that the community has. But the community likes it. They love coming to here. I mean, the city does get out there. It's really, I think it's that great because we sort of thought, now we got another community.
As a staff person, we hated those meetings because they're kind of like learning opportunities, and they're usually about traffic more than anything else. And so I would put the city traffic engineer and say, well, it's time for Mr. Traffic. And he would go up and answer all those questions.
Those neighborhood meetings don't deal with what we're doing with our downtown, which we're a downtown neighborhood.
But what they do is they set a tone that the government is listening, the government cares, We may tell you the same answer over and over again, but you know what? Sometimes people say, oh, wow, yeah, we'll have it repainted tomorrow. You know, so I mean, I think that's the stuff that it does. It shows the community that the government is involved, engaged, and cares. At least somewhat.
I just want to say on the developer issue, I mean, you probably add to it, but don't think that every encounter with a developer is a happy little conversation. I mean, we've dealt with, there are some developers, particularly like that old Mayfield site, who are impossible to deal with. Their projects are marginally financially successful, and there was pushback on every possible community proposal, and so it was awful. There are other developers that are terrific to work with. So it's really a situational experience, and you have to find, as an elected official, a kind of way to navigate through that.
So I'm happy if anybody has any other questions.
Yeah, I'm going around. Thanks.
Thank you all very much.